But thank you so much for having me here and for inviting History of a Painting to screen at MediaMorfosis. And thank you to the festival for organizing our Spanish version, which was narrated by Francisca Valenzuela. That was really special, is really special. So it's playing in the cinema, so you can all go check it out. And obviously, therefore, there is a version in Spanish, so that'll be easy. But I'm here to talk about the project, History of a Painting. It is a series project, and we are showing our second episode, The Light and the Shadow, here. But I will talk to you about my first episode as well, because it's part of the process of our exploration and establishment of how to create a series that's educational and entertaining at the same time. Please excuse my notes as well, because otherwise I'll get lost. So we made 2 episodes in just under 2 years, and we basically produced them in sprints. But that also means that we took the time in between both episodes to reflect on what we were doing and how we could learn from it. So this is an educational series, and we ourselves are continually learning as we make it and figuring out how to improve and how to make it a series that will appeal to our audience. So, what is HOPE? History of a Painting. We call it HOPE because it's quite a mouthful. It's a 6-DOF VR series narrated by contemporary creatives, and we tell the stories behind some of the world's most extraordinary art and artists, whilst trying, hopefully, to keep things entertaining. And something that Connie said, actually, in her presentation, I thought was really interesting, about how we often see artists as having been successful only after their deaths. And we sort of put art and artists on a pedestal that becomes this impossible thing to achieve. And one of the things that we wanted to do with this series was to actually show that these iconic artists are first and foremost people. They're people with extraordinary stories and who have had an impact, and we need to know what these stories are in order to better understand the cultures that we live in. And so we thought this is an important thing that we need to put out there to contribute to democratizing art, but also to empower our audience who often feels outside of the conversation of art history. So the genesis of our project, a pandemic. It started in early 2020. We applied for a grant, Creative XR, and that brings us to government funding. Without government funding, we would not have been able to make this project. So these are the partners involved in our project, quite a few different partners, as you can see. 2 co-creators, so Quentin Darris and myself. We combined our passions. I studied art history as an undergraduate, and Quentin grew up in a household with educators and art historians, and has grown up with a passion for exploring complex ideas and making them entertaining. So we put these 2 concepts together, figuring out that art history is often seen as very highbrow and exclusive, and there's no reason for that. It shouldn't be like that. It should be something that speaks to a wide audience, including a young audience. And so to that end, we worked with an agile team. We've built an agile team around the project. Because we're focusing on education today, I'm putting Dominique Darras first here, who is Quentin's mother. She was our pedagogical consultant. She really helped us shape how to think about the story, which were going to be interesting elements to put forward, how to make links between history context and the artist, and make that all understandable and enjoyable for an audience. And that really is a skill So we collaborated, with the right people, including art historians, to make sure that what we were putting forward was not only educationally sound, but also academically correct. We worked with Charlotte Mickelborg, with whom I produced, Jasmine Kent-Rodgman, our composer, Larissa Moürre, who cast our episodes, and therefore some kick-ass narrators and many, many more people. All this to say that it does take quite a big team to create projects. So creating an entertaining and educational piece is hard, and it's not always going to, work out necessarily. But what we're going to be exploring in this talk is, how to bet on yourself, and how to really believe in what you're doing, your team and your project, and to give yourself all of the means that you can in order to push something forward. Usually when something is worth it, it's hard. You have to establish the DNA of your project quite early on as well, so you make sure your whole team is on the same page. What are we trying to do? And is it clear? Can we say it? Can we express it in 1 or 2 sentences? And that's going to be really important, because as you progress and you create your project, you're going to have lots of ideas thrown at you, and they might sound really good in the moment, but they might also take you away from your original concept and your original goal. Therefore, once you've established the DNA of your project, you also need to think of who your audience is, and how are you going to build your project around that? How are you going to reach that audience? And that also brings you to thinking about your USP, your unique selling point. What is making your project unique, worth it? Why are people going to watch it and enjoy it? And in our case, we identified that our target audience was young adults, but we also didn't want to alienate older audiences who are the more natural audience who go to museums and cultural institutions. So we really had to toe that line. And of course, we had to navigate different industries, educational industry, content creation, and cultural institution industries, which we'll go into a bit later. So, making hope. This was a project that was possible because the team had complementary skills. So we really built the project around our skill set, essentially. So it's quite a project that's specific to us as creators. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because this was our prototype. And we had 3 months to make it. And we decided to make it on Georges Seurat and his painting La Grande Jatte, which you can see right there in the middle. And it's an episode that's made in a pointillist style. And that's part of our project's DNA, which is creating an episode that reflects the style of the painting. And then, of course, now we've got the light and the shadow, la luz and la sombra. And this is our second episode, so you can see that there's already a huge difference. There's the character, which there wasn't in the other one, and the style is different. So each episode is quite unique in and of itself. So I'm now going to show you the trailer that we made to apply for our grant. And I'm going to show you, if we have time, 3 trailers that show the project at different stages of production. And I thought this would be helpful because you can see that, well, I think, maybe you won't agree, but you'll see, that we've established the tone and the identity of the project since the beginning. And so you'll see the progression and how it's sort of become more complex whilst remaining true to itself.
You know this painting. But actually, what do you know about this painting? Why is this one important? Why do some paintings stand the test of time and not others? All great paintings have something in common. They have a great story behind them. This project is about uncovering these stories, starting with this one, which is about revolution, revolutionary painting, revolutionary perspective, and the Industrial Revolution. Changing your views on the paintings that changed the world.
Right, so that's a trailer that we made with Quentin in just under a week when we were creating our application for Creative XR. And you'll see that in the later trailers, it hasn't changed that much. So our guiding principles since day zero, it's an exaggeration because there's probably no such thing as day zero, but it's just to show that these were, fundamental to the creation of the project. Our goal was, as I said earlier, to participate in the democratization of art via accessibility. And that word has many, many meanings. The first one was really because art and art history is often seen as highbrow, we wanted to show and prove that that's not the case, that it is for everyone. We also wanted to create something that was actually going to make art physically more accessible, which I guess might be a little bit ironic because virtual reality and head-mounted displays, headsets are still not that easy to come by, and many people don't own one. But what the pandemic did show us is that in the best of times, not everyone can travel to go see a painting in real life. And we'll see that, with art, scale is often really important. Creating that personal relationship with a piece of art is also really important. You can't appreciate something on a piece of paper or a screen the same way as you do in real life. So what's the next best thing? Seeing it in virtual reality. We'll never replace going to see something in real life, but we can also try and offer solutions for alternatives. And so, during the pandemic, no one could travel. So it became quite obvious that even outside of a pandemic, this is a problem for many people anyway. We wanted to create something with a project with a warm and friendly voice. We wanted the narrator to feel like your friend, someone you've never met, and yet you feel a closeness to them because they're talking directly to you with a very approachable tone, and that was incredibly important to us from day one. And that's why we decided to work with contemporary creatives. Our first episode was narrated by Speech Gaelle, our second episode by Keris Matthews and Francisca Valenzuela, and they are all singers who are very well known in their respective countries. And that creates a bridge between the viewer and the content. So to that end, we were focusing on scholarship and storytelling as well. We wanted to create something that was going to be entertaining, that was going to take you on a journey, whilst actually being, as far as any academia can prove, factually true. We didn't make anything up. We didn't romanticize anything. We didn't fictionalize anything. If we make our characters talk, it's because we have letters from Artemisia and we only repeated what she wrote in her letters. So we didn't make anything up. We really were showing you who this person was as best as we could. And we wanted to make sure that we were creating something where the viewer was going to be immersed in the painting's world without denaturing the painting or the composition itself. Perhaps this is my nerdy side, my art history side. But I didn't want to create something where the artwork was going to be changed. There are a lot of VR experiences that do that and that have their own remit and, of course, add their value to the marketplace and to the ecosystem. But we wanted to create something that was going to teach you about this artwork and how it is, and therefore we didn't want to change it. And we also wanted to work with cultural institutions, and therefore we wanted to remain respectful of the original intention of the artist. Every episode has a visual style that echoes the painting. This is just because it's part of the extra step of immersion. And we created recognizable elements from that becomes part of the DNA of the series. One of those is that we start in a gallery space and we end in a gallery space in every episode. And that gallery space reflects the actual gallery space in which the painting is held. It's not the exact replica, but it has the same style and vibe. And so, of course, we build teams and gather consultants around each episode to make sure that we're gathering the right professionals to advise us on the content that we're creating. And lastly, I probably should have bumped that up the list, but we work on a 3-act structure. So we adopted a very traditional form of storytelling. And in fact, we didn't make anything up in these artist stories. Their lives actually just happened to be structured very naturally into a 3-act structure, which I guess just shows that it's a very intuitive and natural way of forming stories. this also helped us to create something that was going to naturally resonate with people and help them follow the flow of the story quite easily. Or at least I hope quite easily. Okay, now, this is the trailer to our first episode, which was our prototype, our proof of concept. And you'll see if you think it's changed a lot since the first one.
Do you know this painting? I mean, you've probably seen it before, right? But actually, what do you know about this painting? Why is this one important? Why do some paintings stand the test of time and not others? All great paintings have something in common. They have a great story behind them. This project is about uncovering these stories, changing your views on the paintings that change the world.
So that's the trailer that we made for our first episode, and we actually reused a lot of the same text that we wrote for the trailer quite early on. So once we did that first episode, we decided we needed to create a space in which we could learn from this project, and before diving into creating the second episode, The Light and the Shadow. So we organized some focus groups. This one is in the National Gallery X space that is owned by the National Gallery in London. But we worked with Royal Holloway, we worked with Manchester Metropolitan University, UCL, and the National Gallery. And they were in various formats. Some were in person, as you saw at the National Gallery. Some were remote, but we were there talking to the participants, and others were completely remote. And in every single case, however, the common thread is that we then asked our participants to fill out a form that was completely anonymous. So we provided, we hope, a space where people could be completely honest about what they thought about the project. And that was invaluable because it not only validated what we were doing, but it also provided us with some very precious insights into how we could improve on the bits that needed improvement, that weren't quite working. So we had a lot of positive reinforcement. We had a lot of positive feedback from our audience. All the key elements that we really wanted to put forward were already starting to become clear. But what we did learn and what we worked to improve upon for the second episode was to create a new pipeline and to establish a new pipeline, which we created a technical Bible. Quentin created a technical Bible, which was not only going to be useful for us down the road as we made more episodes, but also, if one of us just got thrown under a bus, then at least the project wasn't going to stop right there and then without us. And we also realized, we knew, but we were confirmed that there was room for improvement. So we improved the interactivity, and I hope that you'll see in when you test the experience. But we worked with a UX consultant who helped us hone in on how we were going to enhance what we already wanted to do. So our project is Gaze interactive led. So that means there's no controllers, which makes it a very intuitive piece. And it also makes it a very accessible piece for people with different abilities. And that was also very important to us. But what we needed to do was also figure out how to make that even more intuitive, which I'll go into a little bit later. We added new team members. We worked with a sound designer. We also worked with a puppet illustrator. We added more people were involved essentially to sort of enhance and enrich the creation of the project. We used more visual aids. So with our 3-act structure, we created 3 different scenes. We marked every moment, every emotional moment much more strongly with visuals, and therefore also more visual diversity. We really worked on world building. So these are some of the feedback that we got, but I won't dwell on that. But we used it because it was actually very encouraging for us to remember, especially in when we were in the throes of production and we were sort of self-doubting. It was very helpful for us to also remember that the project was resonating with our key audience. Damien this morning talked about Tiltbrush. Well, this is made in Tiltbrush. This was our sort of VR storyboard. And we created this for ourselves. Quentin drew it. But it was also important because we figured out that at any moment when we have external key stakeholders, we need to be able to communicate with them what it is that we're doing and to verify whether or not it's working. We added characters. So on the right, you see Artemisia, and on the left, this is a puppet illustrated by Su Yu, who is our puppet illustrator. That's how we broke down creating the puppets. So it looks very actually normal, like very traditional. It doesn't look like this belongs really in VR. And here, this is a screen grab from the Unity project that Quentin built. And in the middle here, you can see a little bird. And so that's our visual aid. In the first episode, we had a very, very, very rudimentary example of that, which was a tree that grew and died as it followed the artist's life. But it was very abstract. So in this episode, we evolved that into a moving companion who could not only emotionally react to what was happening in the scene, but who could also visually guide us so that we were sure that the viewer at no moment was going to be lost. We created a 360 space in which the viewer could look around and interact, but we also wanted to make sure that they felt safe, knowing that they weren't going to miss anything that was important. And of course, these are just visuals that helped us create a more rich visual world. So this is actually an image of what we put outside the windows in the experience. Okay, so I'm gonna skip through this one. This is the trailer for the third episode, but because you're gonna, or the second episode, sorry, but because you're gonna see it, we don't really need to dwell on this because I'd rather spend more time on the rest. See? Okay, fine. All right.
Do you know this woman? Artemisia Gentileschi. Chances are you've heard her name somewhere, but any idea why?
That was probably one of the most unique experiences I've had.
It was just wonderful just watching around. And when the paintings come around you, it was just really fantastic.
All great paintings have something in common. They have a great story behind them.
Yeah, so here you can see that we're going to be screening it at Burley House very soon. So this will be our first UK exhibition. Okay. So once we learnt about our production and how to create something that we felt was going to resonate with our target audience, we also had to face the challenges and the solutions that we felt we were bringing. So the biggest challenge for us was the need to bridge different ecosystems. So as I mentioned earlier, that was the educational, the art world, the entertainment world, the content production world, as well as the cultural institution world, who all work with very, very different timescales. And so that's something that we've been learning as well, is figuring out how to adapt to those different timescales, how to ensure that what we're making really is accessible. And that is something that we're still working on, we're still figuring out, I think, as is the entire VR industry. But we're working, we're forming partnerships to make sure that our episode is going to be widely seen. And in fact, our first episode we've made available for free. Our second episode we're going to monetize on platforms because we also want to contribute to ensuring that the VR industry has, a business case and is viable. The pandemic has both been an opportunity and a challenge for us. An opportunity because this project might not exist if we hadn't had a pandemic. But it's also been challenging because it's also shown that, head-mounted displays are still difficult to distribute, even though cultural institutions are facing renewal and young audience attraction problems. Getting involved in new media is also still, for a lot, quite scary, and also at the same time, because they operate on very, very different timescales, that is, as I said, a challenge. But we feel that it's a series that does offer solutions to cultural institutions' problems because it speaks to young audiences, because it's a project that doesn't speak down to the audience. It's a project that makes you feel involved and makes you feel seen in a way, because we don't shy away from difficult subject matters in our stories, because we work with the contemporary creatives that we've worked with, who themselves don't sound like the typical art historians. And so it shows that really this is something that can involve all. And in fact, that a great artist can come from anywhere. They don't have to have certain status or opportunities. You know, the industry is incredibly diverse. So once we sort of digested our challenges and our solutions, we also figured we should be also listing what our unique selling points are. And this is actually quite important, not only for ourselves, but also in communicating about the project with potential partners. It's also important for us to know how to sell the project by identifying our unique selling points. So we figured, okay, well, this is a team that has very complementary and specific skills that allow this project to be what it is. We're story and not tech driven, which means that because it's a project that's made with very simple user experience and technology, there is a very low barrier to entry. It's very intuitive. It's only gaze led. You can be in a wheelchair. We had a blind lady who watched the project and still enjoyed it, and so it's really a project that can appeal to many different people. We created a heightened sense of immersion with our storytelling because it appeals to young adults without alienating older audiences as well. I will say that probably the audience who this is not for is people who already know a lot about art history. This is really for people who are interested in taking that first step. And it's also a VR series in the sense that it's not a serial, but really a series in the traditional sense, where each episode is self-contained, but there is a through line through the identifiable aspects of working with a creative, contemporary creative, 3-act structure, having similar starting and end points, as well as similar UX. And we focus on diversity. So we really wanted to show that the canon of art and art history isn't only or isn't exclusively dominated by white European men for the Western canon, but that it involves women since the 17th century. Artemisia Gentileschi was a Baroque Italian artist from the 17th century, and she wasn't the only one. She was incredibly successful in her lifetime, but it's important to say that she wasn't the only one. And then to the right here, we've got an image of a painting by Jean-Michel Basquiat, who we would love to do an episode on further down the line. Okay, so we made the thing. What next? Well, obviously, festivals like this one are a huge opportunity to showcase a project. Exhibitions like the one that we're going to have at Burley House as well, putting the project online. But we are also figuring out, other ways that the project can be seen by audiences. We're reaching out to educational institutions. We're creating a 360 video of the project. So that, of course, is not going to show the project to its fullest potential. But what it does do is it bridges that gap between those who have access to a 6DoF headset and those who don't. Because first and foremost, we want to put the stories out there. So, of course, we're working on creating new partnerships for the existing episodes, but also new partnerships for new episodes. The great thing about this kind of project is that it can travel. Not only existing episodes can be translated into different languages, but of course, we can make episodes that are going to culturally resonate with different cultures. And that also will be through team building and making sure that we bring on the right people to tell those stories. So, thank you very much. Yeah.
Ahí estamos. Por
There you
favor.
go, please.
¿Te animas a que te hable en español?
Do you dare to listen to me in Spanish and then reply to me in English? Okay, but please speak slowly.
Bueno, y vamos a abrir a
Of
preguntas
course,
enseguida.
we'll open the
Gaelle,
questions
Cuando tú
in a
empezaste con
second.
esta serie,
Well, when you started with this
¿imaginaste
series,
que
did you
iban a haber
ever
también
imagine that
alumnos de
other
escuela?
people or
¿Pensaste que el
students were
público
going to
podían
be
ser
watching? Did you imagine the
adolescentes,
audience
niños?
being
Yeah, we hadn't necessarily honed in on exactly the age group because that does also depend on the episode. Our first episode, for example, is universal, whereas the second episode is probably for 12 and above. But we always wanted to speak to young adults. So that's teenagers and up to university students. And that was always the goal, was to reach these audiences at a time when they might not be interested in art history and to show them that this is something that has value. Well, we chose Artemisia because we wanted to next focus on a woman. We didn't want to go from having focused on a man to another man because we wanted to diversify the series. But we actually did not know that about Artemisia's story, but when we decided to go for her. What we did know was her self-portrait as St. Catherine of Alexandria was incredibly evocative and interesting, and that was enough for us to get interested in discovering more about her story. And we stumbled upon an extraordinary story that is actually quite well known within the art history world, but I think within general culture it isn't. So that was we were very fortunate that her story for us was quite extraordinary.
¿Puedes contar en 2 palabras la historia de Artemisia para
Yeah.
que entiendan por qué decimos que es extraordinaria?
Yeah. So Artemisia was born in the 17th century. She was an incredibly gifted artist. Her father was an artist, and she became his apprentice. She was unfortunately attacked and raped by her teacher when she was a teenager, and when she was 17, I believe. And long story short, she and her family took Tassi, her rapist, to court, and she won. But she was tortured. That was the way at the time that they could verify whether or not you were telling the truth. If you were tortured and your story changed, it meant that you had been lying. But if you were tortured and you stuck to your story, then you were telling the truth. And Artemisia stuck to her story, so she won. And she then married. Her husband abandoned her. She became a single mother, but she was so well regarded and respected in her own lifetime that she kept herself and her daughter afloat. And so she became one of the most in-demand artists of her time, regardless of her gender. And her gender was an obstacle for her, and she was aware of it. I don't know if she would have said she was a feminist because that wasn't a concept at the time, but she certainly is a great icon and a great example for us today, and a great demonstration of resilience and talent.
Y ahora, ¿siguen pensando en nuevos capítulos? ¿Hay algún capítulo sobre algún artista latinoamericano que te gustaría hacer?
Yes, you know the answer, yes. Frida Kahlo, of course. Would love to do an episode on her. She's an extraordinary artist, and we all know her to some extent, but we don't know her well. So we would love to bring her forward in VR.
Pero tú me dijiste, ¿por qué? ¿Qué es lo que te gustaría, qué es lo que la gente sabe de Frida y qué es lo que te gustaría contar?
Okay, well, so I don't know the ins and outs of what we would want to say because that would be part of the research. But yeah, people know that, well, two things people know about Frida Kahlo is, yes, her disability and her hairstyle and unibrow, basically. She is an image icon. But why was she so popular? Why was she so talented? You know, what were her obstacles, and why does she still matter today? I don't think that that's a story that is widely known. So that would be really interesting to bring that forward.
Yo recuerdo mis clases de arte en la escuela y muchas eran muy aburridas. Yo imagino que si me enseñaran arte y conociera la historia de Artemisia con esta pieza, sería súper inspirador. ¿Pensaste en eso al momento de hacer la serie? ¿Te imaginas que tu herramienta sirva en el aula?
Yeah. Yes, we definitely want to bring it to classrooms, and that's something that we are hoping to work, that we are striving to work towards. I'm clearly a nerd, so I've always found art history interesting, but of course I realize, and that's why we made this, that art history is often seen as something that is not for everyone, not interesting, super old school. And in fact, artists in their lifetimes were, they not necessarily rebels, no, but they were making comments on their context. They were bold, they had things to say, and the fact that they are now in the canon today sort of displaces them from that context. It makes them almost like they're made out of marble, they're not real. And so we just wanted to show that actually these artists were facing issues that we are still facing today. A lot of the topics that we can uncover in their lives are relevant today. And so creating that link, I think, is incredibly interesting. It helps us to feel connected to our heritage as well, which is really important, so that we can understand the world that we live in today.
Bien.
Hi Gaelle, congratulations, it's amazing what you're doing.
Thank you,
Es muy
Connie.
lindo lo que estás haciendo, lo digo rapidito. Tres preguntas, 3 questions.
Okay.
1, how long does each episode last? 2nd, if you can tell me an approximate amount of budget you need to develop one of each. ¿Cuánto sale más o menos hacer cada uno? If you need the rights of the artists or the approval of the legacy or the family or whatever in order to reproduce the artwork.
Yeah.
Y si necesita la autorización de los artistas o el legado de la familia para reproducir las obras.
Very good questions. So the episodes, we try to keep them around 15 minutes. But let's say from onboarding to offboarding, 15 minutes and 30 seconds. And that's this one. This first episode is shorter. In terms of budget, that also varies. The first episode was a lot less expensive than the second episode. And I don't want to necessarily commit to a figure, but for the second episode, for example, we had a budget of approximately £100,000. Pounds, which is, pounds. It's a lot of money in and of itself, but for animation and for VR, that's actually a very small budget. But what we also figured was, now that we have our first episode and our second episode, they're also proofs of concepts in and of themselves. The first episode is much simpler. It's shorter, there's no characters. The second episode is longer, has quite a few characters, different scene changes. So we've sort of explored the two extremes. And what that's allowed us to prepare for is to create something perhaps in the middle. But we've also created an AR companion piece, which I didn't talk about. But the AR companion piece recycles assets from the second episode. And it's just like a 3-minute introduction to the project, and that's also a possibility, to create something that's a lot more affordable. So we've sort of created a palette that we can pick and mix from, depending on the context and the artist. Okay, lastly, copyright, basically. Well, these two artists, Georges Seurat and Artemisia Gentileschi, died a very long time ago, so they are out of copyright. So the only thing we need to license is the right to using the photo of the painting. For Georges Seurat, the Art Institute of Chicago actually don't ask for any license fee. And that's also why we chose it. Obviously, it's a very iconic painting, but we had 3 months to make it, and so we just needed to be able to go straight ahead, straight into work. Whereas with Artemisia Gentileschi, we cleared the rights for every painting. If we worked with a contemporary artist like Basquiat or Frida Kahlo, yes, we would have to work with their estate, for sure. Yeah.
Ok. Arnau tiene una
Sí, yo
pregunta.
te quiero preguntar, Gaelle, en términos de narrativa, para salir un poquito de hacer el salto, ¿no? Porque MediaMorfosis está muy bien, pero también es tecnológico, ¿no? Yo voy un poco al otro lado. Está muy claro que al final se ve muy claro en las 3 piezas, ¿no? Que es fantástico, como hay una aproximación al cuadro, pero el cuadro es una parte de la historia, ¿no? Es una parte del big picture, del frame. ¿Se ha planteado el equipo o salió la idea de, aparte de explicar el contexto del cuadro y la historia del cuadro, que es una parte y me gusta mucho, está como metonimia o parte del todo, como metáfora, si también sería interesante o qué podría aportar explicar la historia del pintor o pintora detrás? ¿Sí? ¿Eso se ha valorado alguna vez? ¿Ha habido alguna idea? ¿O lo ves como una tercera capa de interpretación, me refiero? ¿Lo habéis valorado? ¿O tiene sentido para ti, como artista, como productora, como realizadora?
I don't think I understood the question. Sorry.
Yeah. I was telling that there's a first layer that you can read, which is the part of the story, the context.
Yeah.
But have you questioned about telling the story of the painter itself behind the story?
Oh, yeah,
Because
yeah.
sometimes there's a problematic connection, or could be more interesting in terms of story rather
Yeah.
than the painting itself.
Yeah. So you haven't seen the episode, the project,
No,
right?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay. No, because that reassures me, because if you'd seen it and you were still asking that question, I'd be like, oh God, we're in trouble. Yeah, because we tell the story of the artist and we tell the story of the painting,
Okay.
and we show different paintings that sort of give you context to why that specific painting matters, why that was different. So we do all of that in 15 minutes. So it's really the top line. We don't dive deep into the technique because that wasn't the most interesting part of Artemisia's life and work. But yeah, totally, we go into her life.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Te llevo a otro lugar, a tu trabajo como directora. A nosotros aquí en MediaMorfosis nos interesa también marcar caminos para los realizadores, para los creadores, y aquí nosotros podemos ver un camino que une la realización, la producción audiovisual, en este caso inmersiva, con la educación. Es decir, tú como creadora audiovisual estás creando una pieza que tal vez su público mayor, yo creo, esté en las aulas, esté en los colegios, en las escuelas, en los estudiantes de arte, ¿sí?
Yeah.
Es decir, tú te das cuenta que hay un camino para los creadores audiovisuales para producir productos educativos.
Yeah, I think, for me it's a departure from what I've done to date, which has been largely science fiction and magical realism and fantasy. But in a way, storytelling is storytelling, you know, and finding your audience is also part of what you should be doing when you're preparing a story. And in this case, our audience was, students, art aficionados, people who are curious, and so of course the natural place for that is classrooms, cultural institutions, exhibitions. So I think storytelling, in a way, good teachers are storytellers. My favorite teachers are the ones who told me stories, and that's how it stuck with me. And so I have a natural instinct for wanting to tell stories, but in this case we had to work with educators to make sure that we were also being pedagogical. So it's a very specific skill set, but I totally think that yes, storytellers, there is a natural through line for storytellers, because it's all about creating a story that is going to be easily understood by your audience, and that's something that Quentin is also very, very good at. He's very good at breaking down something and making it sound really interesting and entertaining, and little less complex or less complicated anyway. Yeah.
Bien, otra pregunta más, algo más para Gaelle, aquí. Y vamos a ir cerrando.
Hi Gaelle, my name is Paola. I'm a cultural producer. I create different types of cultural products, such as books, movies, and visual arts. And I have two questions for you. One is a question and another one is a suggestion. The first one is, why did you choose that painting of Artemisia Gentileschi?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We were funded by a UK government fund. So we could have focused on any artist in the world, or even Artemisia, but a different painting in the world. But ultimately we decided we wanted to use UK money to focus on a UK held work of art. And so this painting is held by the National Gallery in London. And so we felt that was important. We were also hoping that this was going to be something that could be shown at the National Gallery at some point, so we took a sort of bet. But the driving factor in choosing something that was UK based was we ought to use UK money to go towards the UK ecosystem.
Understand, thank you. And the other one is that, do you know the work of Clara Peters?
No, I don't.
Okay, you should. It's amazing. It's an amazing story because she seems to have invented the selfie, but maybe 5 centuries ago. So she's an artist that, in a moment that women were not intended to be artists, so she portrayed herself in the brides of the... I don't know if I can be able to explain this in English. So, ella se retrata en las superficies brillosas de los objetos en las pinturas. And maybe the last 5 years or 10 years, the art historians discovered there was someone portrayed in those shines. And they start joining with another pictures, and they found it was her.
Wow!
So you should. It's another chapter.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that's always. I like these little Easter eggs that artists leave us in some paintings. So that's really interesting. Clara Peters.
Clara Peters, yes, because I'm also an art teacher, so and the kids love that story.
Yeah.
So you should. It's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah.
Gracias. Bueno, les cuento que MediaMorfosis participó en la traducción, produjo la traducción al español por la actriz Francisca Valenzuela.
La cantante.
Cantante, perdón, soy argentino. Y está esa versión aquí, en español. Y creo que si ahora se les despertaron las ganas después de escuchar tanto hablar de esa obra, la pueden ver en español o en inglés, en su versión original, aquí en nuestra sala. Otro tema que pensaba es que tú contabas, naturalmente, que tu obra cuesta unas 100.000 libras, unos $130.000, más o menos. Y ahí queda claro cómo en nuestra región podemos prototipar, pero llegar a esas cifras para producir, si no nos asociamos y no nos vinculamos con países que tienen esos fondos, para nosotros es muy difícil producir esas obras. Realmente creo que hay capacidad muy buena en la región, pero necesitamos acercarnos, y tu obra es claramente un ejemplo de eso por la complejidad que tiene. Bueno, ¿alguna pregunta más? ¿No? Un aplauso, por favor, para Gaelle. Los invitamos a todos a ver su obra.
you.